Normal Children in a Privileged World, a webinar by the Family Business Network North America. Very glad that you could join us today. Before we get started with our program, I want to just bring your attention to a couple of things that are going to happen throughout the webinar. On the right-hand side of your screen, you have a dialogue screen that has an area that says chat. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can send them to us by typing your question in the dialog box and then hitting send, and we'll gather those questions, and if we can answer them during the session, we will. If not, we have a session at the end where we can answer any kind of remaining outstanding questions. Also, we're going to have a polling mechanism during the webinar where you can give your input, and we'll see the live results during the webinar, and just keep your eye open for that. We'll give you instructions when we get there. Before we go into the content, I want to bring your attention to two upcoming webinars that we're having. We're having a Next Gen only webinar on building your credibility and influence in your family business, and a webinar on emergency transition planning October 13th. The Next Gen webinar is September 15th. If you'd like to register for those, you can go to our website at www.fbn-na.org. We also have our conference coming up in November 12th and 13th on breaking barriers and strengthening communication in your family business. We'll have 2 days, the 12th and 13th, that are designed for the whole family, and then on the 13th and 14th we have a special Next Generation only event which will continue the conference on communication and strengthening communication, but in a Next Gen only environment. So it'll be a really great event at the Biltmore Hotel in Miami. If you'd like more information, again, you can go to our website. Go on to the next slide. I'll just introduce my guest speaker. My name is Andrew Kite. I'm the Executive Director of the Family Business Center of Loyola and the President of FBN North America, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague and clinical fellow from Loyola, Edward Monti. Edward is a G3 member. I'm a G3 member. It's a G4 member of a family business, so we both bring our practical experience with family business as well as our professional experience. Ed is the founder and principal of Family Solutions Group and has been a couple and family therapist for over 35 years and has been intimately involved in our Next Generation Leadership Institute. If we go to the next slide, I'll just give you a quick overview of our program today. We're going to talk about the messages we get about wealth in our society, and we're also going to talk about the myths versus realities. You know, there are a lot of stories that are told about wealth in our media and our society. We're going to look at what of those are true and what of those are just merely myths that are driven by the fear of the impact of wealth on people. We're going to get your input, and we're going to end by giving you some concrete things that you can do to help build a responsible next generation when it comes to wealth. So Edward, welcome. Our first fact or myth that we're going to dive into is that children of wealth are entitled to the money, privilege, and power and lifestyle of their parents. So as you look at that question, it's certainly that sense of entitlement is a real concern for a lot of parents. What reflections do you have on this being a fact or a myth?
Well, one of the things that you want to think about, you know, we came up with a list of statements for this webinar that are people's worst fears or best hopes, and I think that this first one speaks directly to birthright. Are the children of wealth, are the children in successful family businesses entitled to the lifestyle, power, privilege, and the money of the parents? Is it truly a family business? Is it truly something that they're part of, or are they seen as separate? And whose money is it? Whose lifestyle is it? Whose privilege, power? Most children of wealth have a sense of privilege and money and have enjoyed the lifestyle, but are often told that the money is not theirs, that the power and privilege does belong to the parents first and foremost, and do not think that you're going to automatically inherit it. So the question is that healthy? Is that not healthy? What can children expect or not? What should be their birthright? And many parents get very frightened by the fact that children actually think part of their birthright is to be part of your family. It sounds odd, but it's in there.
So that sense of entitlement when you're engaging with the next generation, how have you seen wealthy families try to address and prevent a sense of entitlement and engage them in a healthy way around the wealth, money, power, privilege?
Well, I think it's going down the middle, Andrew, where there is a birthright, and I feel strongly that children are born into families with certain privileges, and those are emotional privileges, reputation, legacy, that they should very much take part in. So if you're part of the Johnson family, then you have all the good rep of the Johnson family. They are often, almost always, part of the lifestyle, and they enjoy the money and the privilege of that. But then again, if that's assumed that it is magical and they get that no matter what they do, no matter how hard they work in school, no matter what they achieve in life, we all know that served a very bad plan. If, on the other hand, we run into families where they are very territorial about money, privilege, and power, they may share some of the lifestyle, but they continually remind the children that it's their money, their lifestyle. Don't think that you're anything better than anyone else because you have to earn it from the get-go. And that's often felt by children as abandonment, as demeaning, as not valuing their being in the family. So what we want to look at is something in the middle that, of course, you are by birthright part of this family and part of these attributes. And you need to begin to work hard to steward those privileges, that power, that money, and to really eke out a sense of who you are yourself. So it's a combination of both.
And how have you seen, what impact have you seen of that wealth that's not earned versus wealth that is earned, and the impact on the identity of the next generation?
Well, again, it's how it's presented. I think every child of wealth has a great deal of money that he or she did not earn, so they need to make peace with that. And that sounds silly because if you don't come from wealth, you go, well, what's the hardship of that? Well, it is demeaning because you are living off the largesse of generations before you who worked hard and proved themselves, and you haven't. So it's making peace with you'll never, ever reach the point where you can say, I did it completely on my own. You're not a self-made person. You're not from the struggle of your own brow that you've managed to earn and do. You are on the shoulders of someone, and you have to make peace with that. The second part of that is you cannot ignore that every person, every child, wealthy or not, has to feel as though they have a place in the world that they have created, that they have done, they have built. So again, we're talking about both making peace with standing on someone's shoulders and not ignoring the fact that you need to have an identity, a productivity, a product, a creation that is truly yours. And that's very difficult in families of wealth and families of generational legacy.
And that references what I like to call the successor's curse. The idea that my successes aren't truly my own, that when we're born into a family business, a lot of times the people around us attribute any of our successes really only to the Silver Spoon Club and other terms. Warren Buffett likes to say the Lucky Sperm Club, but there's this sense or this challenge for the successor that their successes are never truly their own, and there are always people who think they're only there because of their last name, and have this challenge of building credibility. How have you seen successors most successfully overcome that curse and create that sense of credibility?
Well, Andrew, as I've heard you say before, I don't know if fully you can overcome it. I think you need to get, as this is a quote from Andrew, everyone, get over yourself, that there is a piece here where you will always be standing on someone's shoulder, that the successor's curse is real, and that you will not be able ever, no matter what you do, to take full responsibility for the enormity of your success. So part of it is get over yourself. That's just who you are. The big push here is that, yes, externally, in the world, you may be dismissed given the successor's curse. The bigger issue is, do you dismiss your own productivity, your own creativity, your own accomplishments internally? So we try to help successors do is to really be realistic about, yes, you're standing on someone's shoulders, and secondly, where do you get your own self-esteem? And that has to be an internal piece. It's not handed to you by the community. The community will dismiss you. They will not assume, Warren Buffett included, Donald Trump included. These are people that started with a great deal of money. And so does that mean whatever they've accomplished has been ridiculous, or they're standing on someone's shoulders, so their accomplishments look bigger, but they're still accomplishments. As long as they know that, and I think both of those may not be my best example, but both of those people seem to have good self-esteem, and they know what they've accomplished. That's what we're trying to do for successors.
Great. Now, let's engage the audience a little bit and get their input with our first polling question. So on your screen is a quick poll, a statement. We want to get your feedback on whether you think this is a fact or a myth. The statement is, children of wealth are ruined by family money. They become lazy and are more prone to abuse, drugs, and alcohol. So if you either think that's a fact or that's a myth, place your vote now, and we'll see how people on this webinar are interpreting this statement. All right, we have 88% myth, 12% fact. Does that surprise you, Edward?
It does. I'm very pleased. I'm smiling. I'm very pleased because it is. If we look at fact or myth, that's one of those statements that's worst fear, or fact. And it is most people's worst fear that if you give your children money, they will automatically be ruined by the money. And our argument is it's not about the money, it's how you raise your children. Plus, if you look at children of wealth, and we always throw out like the Kennedys, and the Kennedys, yes, have drug addicts, whatever. But there's, let's say 25 cousins, there's 3 that are drug addicts. The rest are incredibly driven and incredibly accomplished and hardworking, and they're not drug addicts, and they're not lazy, and they're not sort of sitting on the curb and not contributing. So that it is a myth. I think that what we have to look at, even genetically, if you're born of 2 type A parents, what is your temperament? What is your work ethic? What have you been told about your value in the world in terms of productivity? And most children of wealth are, in fact, the opposite of lazy drug addicts. They are, as people are saying here, 80% know that there are people of great character and hard work. Often Andrew and I have talked about this before in front of families, and all you have to do is have everyone in the room who has money raise their hands if they were raised with money. There are certainly some that aren't, but the vast majority had some money. So why aren't they all drug addicts and lazy? They're sitting there in the next generation having worked hard, and they're worried about their children. So no, money does not necessarily do it. How you raise your child around money does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how much do you think we've heard the term helicopter parent out there, or tiger mom, or all these kind of wonderful little cliche terms. How do you see that interacting with wealth? Are wealthy parents more likely to be over-involved in kind of driving that sense of achievement in the next generation?
I would say yes. I mean, the idea, are they hovering, or are they paying someone else to hover? Are they highly driven in terms of education and accomplishment? The answer is absolutely. They have the means to do it. Oftentimes, again, if the parents are much more type A than general public, which they tend to be, yes, their children will become one of several major projects for them, and they will be very involved. What we've seen, if we take out the extremes, that the standard common knowledge is if you get involved in your children's education, the child usually ends up achieving more than if you don't. They have better grades if you go to the PTA meeting as opposed to if you don't, at whatever economic level. So that if we are parents of wealth who can afford every resource, the achievement, the message to your child about what they should do does get digested. Now, again, we have to be very careful. If we look at the myth, as 88% of you believe that there's a myth there, there is the other side of it, which is how do people of wealth really burden their children with achievement, productivity, the legacy? How do we pace that so you don't overwhelm the child, but also don't let them slip through the cracks? And that's a tough one.
So let's go on to the next factor myth that is out there. There's the statement, children of wealth achieve at a much higher level than other children. Is that a fact or is that a myth?
That's a fact. That children of wealth, again, they grow up with certain expectations. These are children that oftentimes, I had a family recently where the daughter gave birth to twins, and for the birth, the father gave her application forms to Princeton. That was his, here we are, congratulations, here's their application forms. They do achieve much more because, again, the expectation is we are big achievers. We have not gotten here by sitting back, and that you will be scrutinized in terms of your achievement. So they do tend to, from the very beginning, work harder, bigger. Doesn't mean that people of no wealth don't. But again, what we're talking about is the myth that children of wealth are lazy and drug addicts. The children of wealth, in fact, work incredibly hard and are under a great deal of stress most of their lives because they're standing next to a myth. They're standing next to a legend, rather, and they're standing next to the idea, the legacy of the family, that we are an incredibly important, highly achieving family. And to be part of that, you can't sit back, and they know that, and they do achieve more.
Are there things that parents can do to moderate that sense of pressure that the next generation? I like to say that that next generation is born into a story that's already being told about the greatness of their families and their parents and grandparents. Are there ways that parents can moderate that pressure?
Sure. And this is not a parenting thing. I mean, it turns out to be a parenting thing, but model it. So how driven are you? How constantly working are you? Do the children see hard work, achievement, celebration, play? What is the moderation in the upper generation? You can't, as you run out the door at 5 in the morning to work out for 2 hours and then be in the office at 10 o'clock, turn to your son and say, be moderate. You have to model that. And people don't get that. They think they can just say the words as they rush out, and they do the next major accomplishment, the next philanthropy event, the next major deal, and then telling the children to relax. The children will do what you do. So you have to change your lifestyle, which is not easy. And you have to be moderate. You have to say, look, I think it's time, put that down, let's go play, and take some of that away. But you have to be able to do it yourself.
So what I'm hearing you say is that really what children see is a big part of how they learn.
Absolutely.
And did you have something else?
Children are watching. Children
are
watching. Yeah. You cannot be a hypocrite and tell someone to do something and not do it yourself. You have to do it yourself, particularly as they get older, because they are really looking, particularly in adolescence, for an adult role model. And if you overdo it, of course, in adolescence, they'll rebel and be not you, but that's usually temporary. But the ultimate goal is to be you, if not surpass you. So if you're looking as though you're not sweating, that everything is easy, you're just working, 100 hours a day, and you don't talk about your own vulnerabilities, you don't talk about your own exhaustion, you don't talk about wanting to moderate, they won't know to do that.
And as I think about that, and I hear you talk about that, I'm also thinking that, one of the challenges for the parents is how do I come to terms with what I learned about money and make a conscious choice to either do things the same way or do it differently rather than just being reactive. And a lot of parents don't take the time to kind of ferret out the messages that they received around wealth and then end up parenting in reaction.
Right, exactly. And would that be a conversation you would ever want to have with your kids? I believe it would be a wonderful conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Because often with wealthy families, if the wealth continues to grow, you also have a cultural piece, which you're further and further away from any sense of insecurity around money. So money just becomes, of course, part of the fabric of the family. So that even the second generation to the third, the second generation is built on a generation that was struggling, that didn't have money, that was really frightened about it. By the third, fourth generation, they're of a different class. They have really grown up with the birthright and the privilege. They're not to be, hurt by that and not to be put down by that, but they have to be told how I was raised as a parent versus how you're being raised, and make that as open a conversation as possible and normalize each generation and their experience of money.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go to the next polling question and get some more input from our audience. So the next statement is, children of wealth possess much less confidence about their place in the world, and they're slower to find their place than other children. Let's, if you can choose whether you think that's fact or myth, we'll get your input in just a second. Ooh, 50-50.
Wow.
This apparently is a much more controversial statement. Children of wealth possess much less confidence about their place in the world, and they're slower to find their place. Mm-hmm. What do you say about that one, Edward?
Well, that actually is a fact. It is interesting it's 50-50, and I'm assuming I know why, but it'd be wonderful if we could talk to people about this. I think that children of wealth often are very confident in their privilege and place in the world as a child of privilege. Where they're not very confident is in face of the legacy of the larger family. So that if you have, we have the next generation leadership group, there are people in their 40s in there. Well, in the non-family business world, someone in their 40s would not consider themselves a child in process of development. But in family business, we do. So oftentimes, given the upper generation tends to stay in the family business, stay with the wealth, talk about the wealth, manage the wealth much longer, children remain children for a longer time. So that it's not unusual for someone to not feel like a full adult until post-middle age or even in their early 50s when they come into full power in the family. So I think it's a little mix. I think people are right to go 50-50 on one level. Absolutely, you're going to have more confidence to be in the world in a certain way. The other part is slower to find their place, and we're talking about their place here as more in terms of their own creation, their own production, their own stamp on the world, particularly the world of business or the legacy. It's a hard act to follow when you've got a big legacy behind you.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably why a lot of families try to have the requirement of outside work experience to increase the sense of differentiation, that get them out into the world, interacting with people who aren't their parents, and trying to speed up a little bit of that that maturation process that can sometimes get stunted if you go right into the family business.
Right. Right. I think we've talked about that a lot, Andrew, over the years. It's a rule that I think is a really good one. Generally, I think it can fall apart in two ways. One is, if the legacy of the family is so great, if there isn't a lot of room for being your own person and you're really more part of the legacy and the enmeshment of the family, I don't care how long you work for the competition or in Cincinnati, when you come back, that's going to get back imprinted on you, so it erases that extra stuff that you learned out there. Oftentimes people come back after 2 to 3 years and the founder will say, what do you think you know because you worked over there? And they begin to undo all the good work they did by having the child go out. I think the other thing you have to be very careful about sending someone out is this a family that has shown the child how to have their place in the family, forget the world, in the family, so they feel safe doing that, or can they only find it outside, in which case the child will not come back. So you're saying that the child go be with other people, and they may find a good surrogate family out there and never come home. So it's a little risky. You've got to really look at family, each family separately.
And I've seen in my research next generation members who go straight into their family business, and they get that they have to build their own credibility. They get they have that kind of internal locus of control, and they work to create their own credibility, and they have the passion for it. So that you know, I haven't seen any research that actually proves or disproves that necessity of outside work experience, and I think that. You know, just being aware of the challenges, whichever path you take, is really important.
Right. And looking again at how we raise the children so they do have a strong sense of what is remarkable about the legacy of this family, about the mission statement, about the identity, so that we are very good people in these 4 ways, and that gets digested early. Doesn't matter if you go outside or stay in. If you have that, you're good to go. What we're looking at is within the family business, that we just keep talking about family businesses here, where is the place for the child to really shine and to really show what they're good at. I'm working with a large family right now, and they're all MBAs, and they have the next generation of brilliant kids. 2 or 3 are not at all numbers people, will never get their MBAs. They're designers, they're salesmen, they're whatever, and they have to be now valued. And it's interesting to watch. They have the legacy in place, but there's another piece that says we are all financial people, and they're ignoring the diversity of the next generation, which is going to be a problem if they don't open up to it. So the kids find their place in the world.
And there's this real tendency, I think, sometimes to think we have to replicate the leader that we have today. And I think you know, that can be a dangerous slope, because the challenges of the future may not be the challenges that we faced in the past. So how do you move beyond one model of leadership, and that there's only one style of leadership, and open yourself to, you know, other styles of leadership looking forward?
Exactly. And then do you, in fact, out of a small pool of parents and their children, what's genetically going to show up, are you actually going to have someone with the same brain as the leader who's there now? So it's not like you're looking across country and you can find someone to lead just the way you do. You've got a small pool here, and you may have someone who has a very different style, very different neurology, very different way of viewing the world and thinking. So you're going to have to be open, otherwise you're not going to go to the next generation.
Yeah, and it becomes another part of that successor's curse, is I'm trying to emulate or copy what was done in the past, rather than become myself and become authentic to my skill sets and my possibilities as a leader. Let's go on to the next slide.
As you honor the past.
Yeah, as you honor the past. Bill Wrigley is one of the people I interviewed for my research, and he liked to say, respect the past, but always do what's right for the future. So I think it's a really powerful thing. So the next slide, the next factor myth that we're going to take a look at is children of wealth are rarely taken seriously. Harris Hill.
Fact, sorry, major fact. Yeah, I say it to all the next generation people. You know that you're a joke. You know that everyone thinks that you're lazy, you're all drug addicts, you're all going to spend the family money. No matter what you do, you're only here because of your last name. And it is a fact, and I think people don't quite understand that, because oftentimes they're in a community of other children of wealth, so they all take each other seriously, but they don't realize the broader population. And the people who may work for them, or the people they go to school of great diversity, will just dismiss them offhand and not take them as seriously as they need to be taken. And it's very hurtful, but we're back to what Andrew Kite would say, which is get used to it. You know, that's just what is happening. You have to have a better internal sense of your own self-worth, and that's what you have to work on, because you're not necessarily going to get it from the outside world.
Yeah, and I think one of the hardest things for the next generation is to how to accept the responsibility that you're born into, and that you don't have a conscious choice of other than to try to reject it, which isn't necessarily healthy or responsible in itself.
Yeah. Yeah, the idea when you look at developmental psychology is that you can't build an identity based on not being your parent. There's nothing to build on. You have to find something from the historic context of your life, from the parents above, the grandparents, that you see in yourself. So there's continuity, and you can build on it. Then from there, certainly the individuality can take flight. So children of wealth, again, are often not valued for having anything more than the historic context. And that's tragic if it gets, again, digested and the self-esteem falls apart. And when we see children of wealth falling apart, it's often or mostly, other than mental health issues, it is mostly around not knowing who they are apart from family and how they can integrate, how they are similar to family.
So, there's this concept of differentiation, which is how do I learn to stand apart but from my family and my parents, yet still be connected in a meaningful way? And how do I, what should I hold on to about the past and what I've been born into, and what do I need to change to be authentic to who I am and what my skill sets are?
And stay in the middle. I mean, differentiation is a concept of sort of the middle ground. On one end, it's enmeshment, so that you are only your parents. You only think what they think. You only feel what they think, what they feel. Or the other extreme, which is disengagement, which is I'm anything but what my parents are. And that's a state of sort of rebellious adolescence. Both enmeshment and disengagement are a passionate disconnection, passionate connection to family without a sense of self. So if you have a sense of self, you can sit at the dining room table, you can be part of the family, and yet know who you are apart from them in a loving, empathetic way. You don't have to rebel, and you don't have to disappear.
So what do parents do that help to foster that sense of self and avoid enmeshment or avoid disengagement?
Okay. It's like the modeling answer earlier is, are you in fact differentiated? How do you feel about yourself? Where is your self-esteem coming from? The enmeshment of the family, or the fact that you rebelled and did something absolutely opposite of the generation before you? Hopefully you feel solid about who you are. You know where you came from. You know what you've created. So again, we're back to, if every parent out there would stop and think, how do I present? What is of value to me? How do I differentiate myself from my parents, and how do I honor my parents? It's back to that, Wrigley quote that you constantly have to go back to, we come from a context, but we are new and fresh and different. So if you have a level of differentiation, you can raise children with a level of differentiation. If you demand enmeshment, how dare you not think politically the way I do? How dare you dress this way? How dare you choose that college? How dare you want to take the business in a different direction? And that's demanding enmeshment. That's going to be a big problem. On the opposite end are all those people in family business that turn to their kids and say, you can be anything you want, go be a ballerina or a shepherd or whatever. And what they're doing is they're forcing disengagement. I have a guy not too long ago with a 20-year-old daughter who has been all around the world, and in a meeting said, I'm tired of traveling. I'm only traveling because you keep pushing me out to go. I just want to stay home and be in the business, and why am I in France for 3 months when I really want to be here? And the parents are so afraid of the enmeshment, they've just kicked her out time and time again. So we want to stay in the middle. We want to say, how can you be who you are within the family?
Mm-hmm.
A little repetitive, but incredibly important for the next generation.
Yeah. Let's go to another polling question. So the next statement is, children of wealth are share a striking sense of personal abandonment similar to children of abject poverty. Wow, that's a provocative statement. Children of wealth share a striking sense of personal abandonment similar to children of abject poverty. Well, let's see what the audience says. Here we go.
Oh,
interesting. So
wow.
People think that that's a myth. 56%,
Yeah.
44% think that's a fact.
Wow. This is where I'd love to hear what people are thinking. It's actually more of a fact than a myth. The idea of personal abandonment, this is as much a gender issue as anything. If we go back to most family businesses and most families of wealth, the male is identified as the person who is produced, who provides. So the wealth is coming from the male. And the idea here is what happens to a male whose entire identity is what he produces. So there's that standard line that behind every successful man is an abandoned spouse, is an abandoned family. If you're busy building an empire, where in the heck are you? You're gone. Are you in fact there? There's a lot written about post-industrial revolution and what happened to men, and we were taken off the farm and we're out in the world achieving, and children end up not seeing, not being raised by, not really connecting to men. And that has gotten better, certainly from my generation to someone in their 30s with their children. Men are more involved, but still primary identification is out in the world. So what happens to the children emotionally? Do they feel as though they're emotionally abandoned? And the answer is oftentimes yes. What then happens around money are two things. One is what men produce and money and giving lifestyle and power and privilege around money is the gift that men give often. So dad will give you $5, mom will hug you. And is that bad, or is that dad giving you what he is identified as? And that's a good thing in some ways. You want to honor the money from him because that's how he shows you he loves you. All right? So children will feel, gee, dad only gives me money, but he's not here for my ball game. Yeah, but you have to understand, dad earning that money and sacrificing what he is personally to achieve it, however this may not comfort you, is at least intellectually an idea that he's doing something for you. If he gives you his family business, that's a very loving thing. He's giving you part of your identity. What children will get angry about is that they feel emotionally abandoned often in wealthy families because dad and oftentimes mom are absent. And the money becomes the payoff. So as long as you're not here and you send me off to boarding school, or you send me off to camp, or you send me off to Europe, and that's the way that you take care of me, then the money becomes very important because it's the currency of love. And so they'll fight over the money. And what we realize in a lot of these negotiations around money and family businesses and children of wealth is, why are we so involved with the money? Because it's not going to change your lifestyle if you inherit $1 million more than less. The money becomes the emotional, loving connection to upper generation. So yes, they do feel abandoned often, and abandoned often similar to children of abject poverty. Is that across the board? I think you're picking up it's a little mixed here.
Yeah. And, another way that I see that show up in families of wealth is sometimes kind of the outsourcing of the daily parenting routines,
Right.
And how do you strike that balance of the challenges of working in a world where, parents often, both parents are working and you need some kind of support in the system, but how do you not go to the extreme of just dropping the kids with the nanny and letting the nanny be the real parent? I think that's the kind of, stereotypical spoiled rich kid, is they're raised by the nanny.
Right, right.
And I would imagine it really exacerbates that sense of abandonment if that's the model.
I mean, just parallel what you just said, Andrew, that people in two-career families, we always think families of privilege sit around by the pool, eating bonbons and, not doing anything. It's a lot of work. It is constant going and doing and being part of the community. And oftentimes what you have are both parents very much engaged in the world, very social because it's good networking, producing at enormous levels, being very successful. And they're not as connected to the children as they'd like to be. Or even if one stays home, and let's assume, just classically the female does, the dad is still out in the world in ways that very poor, working poor people are out in the world. If both parents have 3 jobs, someone else is taking care of the kids or no one is. And we sit with families of wealth all the time, and children talk about having been raised literally by wolves, that they're there and they know they're loved, but where were their parents? Well, their parents were struggling in a very different way to keep it all going, whether it's poor or wealthy. So that's where those connections are.
Gotcha. Let's go on to the next factor myth. Children of wealth feel personally invisible in comparison to the achievement and financial success of their present and historic family.
Yeah. Well, it's one that we've been talking about from the very beginning of the webinar. It is fact, and that it's not necessarily anyone's fault it's a hard act to follow. How do you differentiate who you are when the historic family and the story, as you said, Andrew, of the family is just so remarkable? I think that if we look at how families of wealth are created, they're often, as you know, created from a heroic figure that is bigger than life, that no one can ever match, ever. I don't care how hard you try. And if you have a Henry Ford, you know, what happened to his kids? How would they ever achieve what Henry Ford achieved? They can keep it going, they can steward it. But who are you personally? Where are your achievements? And do they, and they do, often feel invisible in comparison to that achievement and financial success? It's a remarkable beginning that is a very hard act to follow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Massimo Ferragamo was one of the people I interviewed in my research, and he said, you know, there are very few Maradonas or Michael Jordans in the world, and if you get caught trying to emulate that as a next generation member, you're going to get stuck.
Right, right. I mean, and a lot of that, as we know, is brilliance and all of that. It's also dumb luck and timing, and when is all the stars going to line up again, regardless of how brilliant the children might be. Mm-hmm. So how do they become visible?
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Let's go on to the next one, the next factor myth, which is children of wealth prove to be more conscientious in handling wealth than their middle-class counterparts.
This is one that I thought when I looked at the lineup would have been an interesting polling question, because the fear is children of wealth will run through the streets and spend all the money, and children of middle class or poorer will not. Most of the research on it actually says they're about the same, if not better, that really when you have great wealth, you have great responsibility. And children of wealth are often, when they inherit, very frightened about the money, despite it's a problem. The rest of us go, really? This is a problem? But it is when you stop to think you have generational wealth that you are now in charge of, and you have to manage it. And if you have the skills, okay, fine, that'll build your self-esteem. If you naturally don't, then how do you manage it, and who do you get around you, and who do you trust, and all of that. So what they find is children of wealth honestly will steward the money. They will be very cautious. How do these families, and if there's any families of wealth listening, well, how has it been passed from generation to generation? If this were only a myth and children of wealth squander money, it would be one generation. And we have families of second, third, fourth, fifth generation of great wealth. Someone's keeping track of it. Someone's proving to be conscientious in its handling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Well, let's go to the next slide. And I wanted to, as we're approaching the question and answer section of the program, I wanted to just offer some suggestions, and Ed, feel free to comment on any of these, but just suggest practical suggestions for parents to think about when addressing this issue of parenting children of wealth and making sure that privilege doesn't become entitlement. So just extrapolating both from the conversation that you and I have had and our experience with next generation successors is, number one, be clear about your values and beliefs and live by example, that the next generation learns much more from how they see you handle money than as much of your words and what you say. So if you're saying all the right things, but your behavior is saying something else, it likely will have an impact on the next generation. Setting appropriate limits and expectations and talking about need versus want.
Could I interrupt?
Sure.
Andrew, the thing here to remember again and again is that the set appropriate limits and expectations and live by example is oftentimes parents will spoil their children and then get horrified that their children are spoiled. It's like, do you set appropriate limits and expectations? What was their 4th birthday party like? What car are they driving at 16? And you don't want them in a junker that they're going to get killed in, but you also don't need to buy them a Bentley when they're 16. So where do you want to take care of your children? And in that great passion and love for them, you don't set appropriate limits and expectations out of love, but it's still spoiling.
Maybe you can put together a guide to car buying for parents. Maybe that should be a book.
That should be it. Okay.
Some other suggestions: show your values through philanthropy, through giving back, both with your time and talents as well as your money, and work to build self-esteem and a practice of communication around money, because oftentimes our parents aren't talking to us around money.
And that's a big one. Most people do not like to talk about money. I've done therapy for years and years, and I know every little nuance of everyone's life privately with a client. They'll tell me about his or her sex life, whatever, and if I turn to them and say, so how much you earn, they're horrified that I would ask such an intimate question. So we don't talk about money, and the belief is don't ever talk to your children about what you have, don't ever tell them about the money, and then how are they supposed to magically know? The interesting thing is poorer people who have to really struggle with money will, in fact, tell their children exactly what they have, because it's important. They know if they can afford something or not. Wealthier you get, the more removed you get from the money. Children aren't schooled in it. Children don't know about it, and then they wonder why they may abuse it or take it for granted. So you must communicate about money and what's there.
That
and you can play with.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was
going to say, and that doesn't mean you have to tell them exactly what's in the bank account always.
Right.
Certainly not younger kids. They'll tell their friends. They'll tell the neighbors. But you need to, no, we're not going to do that because I choose not to buy it. Or even we may not be able to afford that right now. I don't care what that is. That's a wonderful thing for your child to hear. There are limits.
Well, that relates to one of the questions that came in during the webinar today, which was, how do we substitute a statement with we can't afford it? How do you have that conversation when you can afford it and it's really
right? Well, I think that's the value piece, which is certainly we can afford it. Do I choose to spend my money that way? I really choose not to. Yes, we could buy a Bentley for you for age 16. I choose not to. I don't like the value of that. I don't like what that would say about us and about you driving it. I really don't. That's not the value of this family. So it's not about affording. That's how I choose to spend my money, and I want to have good limits, and I want to have respect of the money. And that money could be spent in different ways or through philanthropy. I'm not going to waste it on buying you something you don't need. And I'm not going to buy something I don't really need. And it has to be terribly frugal, but I don't want to be extravagant about this. I'm choosing to steward the money.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to the next slide and give a few more suggestions. So I think it's important to give children perspective on the wealth. So sometimes you can become insular, I think, if you're only interacting with wealthy families. How does a child get perspective? How do they build life skills when we're outsourcing so much in our daily life as a family, and some of the basic life skills, and how do we set expectations for that next generation? Any thoughts on those first?
Well, I think that the perspective is around diversity and economic diversity. When someone grows up in a bubble, whether they're poor or wealthy, that's all they know. And we've already seen with, exposing children who come from more deprivation financially, putting them in experiences of seeing different models helps them, inspires them to achieve and go in a different direction. If you want education, put them around people who are educated. Do it the other way, that if we live in a little bubble of supreme wealth, we really don't get that the vast majority of people do not live like this. So take them out of that, put them in situations where they are seeing what average people live with, and that is really fine and normal and good. So what are those practices in terms of how they handle money, but also what character does that build? But just broaden their expectations. Their perspective, rather, and build the life skills. I mean, that really is important, that they do know how to fend for themselves. There's nothing sadder than someone who reaches a certain age developmentally, let's say early 20s, mid-20s, and they're launching in the world, and they have no life skills to do that. So parents buy them the apartment. Parents have someone who comes and cleans it. Somebody just takes care of them as though they were 12. And you're really aborting the developmental life cycle process of not giving them life skills, and they will remain a child. So you have to be very careful with that of privilege, because you can say you don't need any life skills. Somebody will always do your laundry. Someone will always clean your house. Not a good idea.
Mm-hmm. So in essence, what you're saying is give them a sense of responsibility and the skills to
Absolutely.
take on those responsibilities, and that probably goes hand in hand with sharing information at an age-appropriate level, is giving them a sense of respect and responsibility that they can handle information and engage in those discussions about budgeting, spending, trade-offs,
Right.
etc.
And I think that's it. It's we will often sort of roll our eyes going, oh my God, parents talk about their children as though someone else raised them. You know, that they don't know how to budget, they don't know how to spend well, they don't know how to do this stuff. And it's like, well, who raised them? When do you say, here's the money you have to save this portion and you can spend that portion and you better spend it in a responsible way? Or people just handed money and they, again, disengage from the reality of money becomes magical. So that is a life skill to know how to manage money. That should be learned from day one all the way up through their lifestyle, their life cycle. And yeah, giving responsibility. You feel like an adult when you have responsibility. You feel like an adult when you can do something. Do not deprive your children of that. It's really demeaning. And sharing information, yes, I think it's appropriate to look at the age of the child, but particularly around money, what we know is families of wealth, children, and children up to even middle age, think you have more money than you do. Sorry, they do. So they're always surprised that we're not more wealthy than we are because they attribute parents as having, you know, supernatural powers. And if we're rich, we're super rich. Well, you are very rich, but you're probably not that rich. So you need to consistently let them know the range of money that is there when it's age appropriate.
And you know, I like to say when we don't have information, we invent a much bigger story than typically
Absolutely.
is actually the case. And another component of that is understanding the structure of how the wealth is owned, because often trust structures, you know, we may have X amount of money. We may have $100 million, $200 million, but the structure of the trust and decision-making and governance doesn't necessarily give us the power to access it. And so, you know, that's often a surprise. And, you know, I think one of the things every parent will understand is that every child is different. And so how we treat one child may be slightly different than how we treat another child.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you have to tailor it as I think any good parent would. I think what you said prior is that in estate planning, in looking at trusts and things of that nature, there's a great deal of loss for children. If you say we are a $50 million family and there's 4 kids, parents live to a certain age, part of it disappears in taxes, some is in trust, divided 4 ways. We go from being a $50 million family and in inheritance you end up a $6 million inheritor, and you wonder what happened to all the money. Well, you have to be very careful that you have children understand what the future actually looks like. We both work with very large, multi-generational families with 100, 200, 300 million in a trust, and there are family members in big family meetings that are 110 people that are very middle class. And yes, it is lovely that they have access to this trust for education or whatever, but it doesn't really affect their lifestyle, nor will it. It will be passed to the next generation. It's a fund you can go to, and it makes your life much easier, but you're not walking around feeling as though you're worth $100 million.
Yeah.
So people have to understand that money gets stored and passed. It doesn't necessarily mean their lifestyle is going to be that of their great-great-grandfather.
And the flip side sometimes happens that the fears that we've been talking about throughout this webinar actually drive the structure of the trusts to try to protect or shield the next generation from the impact of that wealth.
Exactly.
So there's a question that came in now that I wanted to address, which is, let me try to read this out here. Aren't kids of wealthy families exposed to dealing with the burden of high expectations versus their peers? And I don't mean expectations that are being pushed on the child by their parents, but rather the ones that the kids would feel themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a great point, because what we've been talking about is don't do that to your children, where You may not, but the culture, the society, their peer group may. And again, if we talk about the ability to talk about money, can we actually open that up to the ability to talk about what is being done to you, what is the bullying by peers and the culture around your money? And again and again, when someone says all you need is good communication skills, it's like, no, you need to believe in communication. From there you can get the skills. But is it okay to say, I have been bullied, and it's an odd word, but bullied into feeling as though I'm not achieving enough, that with the money I should be much further along than I am. Often with family businesses and with great wealth, children are pushed beyond their developmental life stage. So we expect more from the 28-year-old who's in the family business and is suddenly a senior vice president in charge of half the world, when in normal life they would be much more middle management. And that happens a great deal by the family, but also the expectations by the community that they should be much further along than they are. And that's very tough.
Mm-hmm. We have another interesting question here, which is, what are the long-term pros and cons of boarding schools?
Oh.
Very specific,
well, it's very specific. The thing about boarding schools, just to throw it out there, is if your child has needs, let's just go with certain needs, that you cannot really help them with. I have a number of parents, let's take away from wealth for a moment very quickly. If a parent has the same learning difficulty as a child, doesn't mean the child is deficit in major ways, but smart kids who have certain deficits, really the engagement of an adolescent and parents trying to help them with something parents don't even understand can be pretty ugly. So having someone else take over that, so someone else will help them with their homework, help them with their achievement, and then you get to enjoy them as your child. That's a major plus, that you take away the drama and the conflict of adolescence by having someone else step in and really take care of the day-to-day stuff where people organize the conflict. So in many ways, that's good. If there's a legacy of boarding school, then it's not an abandonment thing. It's a rite of passage. So if dad went to boarding school, mom went to boarding school, you go to boarding school, like camp, like anything else, it becomes normative. And it demands a great deal of connection and involvement with a child in boarding school so they don't feel as though they've been dropped off at the side of the highway. The downside is the disconnection, is the abandonment of great wealth, that someone else will raise you and I'll see you now and then. And children, you know, and there's lots of studies on children and education and the emotional stuff of being, you know, dropped off and institutionalized and having someone else take care of them. Not so good, really not so good, particularly if parents aren't hands-on elsewhere.
Well, I'm conscious that we're at 2 o'clock, but we only have 2 more questions. So for those of you who have to sign off, you can capture those by getting the recording. But I want to try to get these last 2 questions in. What are your thoughts on young adults of wealth being expected and encouraged to work, i.e. Summer jobs, part-time work, etc.?
As opposed to not being expected to work?
I
guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's good. I mean, you want to build a work ethic. I think that there's nothing worse than a child who doesn't feel they have to do anything, that it will be, if they don't work, somebody else will, and they're okay, and they can sit on the couch. Well, you know, standard thing in parenting, that's not a good idea. However, I would say with children of wealth or children with great expectations, it's like children with great talent. If you're a piano prodigy, should you be working at the 7-Eleven if there's any way for you to pursue your talents? So that if you are a child of wealth and there is going to be great expectations on you in, let's say, an international family business, I don't know if sending you to Europe when you're 19 is not a better idea than having you work at the local 7-Eleven. Probably will be a very nice thing to put you in a position of being more worldly. So I think you have to watch how you do that per kid. Bottom line is, yeah, kids should work. That's building life skills. But work might be, go to Europe and learn what that's about, because you're going to be overseeing a department someday that's, you know, based in Europe. You need to know that culture. Go.
Another great question here, which is, how do you foster, so we went over a lot of different traits, desired parenting traits and ways to help the next generation, but how do you foster these desired parenting traits when the family is becoming larger and larger and there are cousins and more people involved in the family history? So in really third
That's a
generation,
great question.
how do you foster it? It's almost how do you enculturate the parents of each generation to parent the right way?
Well, and Andrew, help me with this one because I think I'm understanding the question, but I may not. I think when you have a basic mission statement and legacy from one side of the family, let's go with Henry Ford, I'm just someone off the top of my head. So whatever the Ford said was a good thing to do in that first, second, third generation. Well, you're also marrying other legacies and other families and other missions and other legacies that need to be incorporated. So what we're looking at is in each generation, sitting down and reviewing where are we now, because we'll take some from dad's side, some from mom's side, and what is this present legacy? How do we want to be seen as a combination of these very, very different families? When we work with enormous families, a family meeting a couple months ago is 200 family members were sitting there, and we're doing a mission statement. That mission statement included as many in-law values as it did the primary family of wealth. And that was wonderful because someone would raise their hand and say, well, I'm not genetically connected to this family, but in my family, we really valued giving of time, not money, because we didn't have money. And that was put in. So I think that's so valuable that you have to acknowledge there are more people than the primary earners or the primary legacy of wealth. That make it a much richer, exciting place and family.
Great. Well, before we sign off, I want to just offer our audience some additional resources and reading that they can go to on these issues. So these are 4 books that Edward and I have experienced and think provide some very valuable perspectives on this challenge: Children of Paradise, The Golden Ghetto, Silver Spoon Kids, and Kids, Wealth, and Consequences. So just some suggestions for additional reading. And as we close out, I'll just remind you about some upcoming events. There are contact information there, and you can get the recording of this webinar. Some families actually like to listen to the recording as a family and then have a conversation about it. It's a great way to foster conversation in a family meeting. So again, educational webinars coming up on September 15th, Building Your Credibility and Influence in Your Family Business. It's a next-gen only event. And Reducing Family Stress Emergency Transition Planning on October 13th. Then in November, we have our Breaking Barriers and Strengthening Communications for the whole family on the 12th and 13th, and next-gen only on the 13th and 14th. Hope you can join us for the event in Miami as well as the future webinars. And thanks all for your engagement and questions. And thank you to Edward Monti for sharing his wisdom with us this afternoon.
Well, thank you for having me.